Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, February 26th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Winunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to on this National Pistachio Day, Jill.
The things I learned on this podcast, Moshe. I feel like you love pistachios.
I'm a big pistachio person. Pistachio. I like a good pistachio ice cream when it's made well. One fun fact about pistachios, we used to get the majority of them from Iran until the hostage crisis in the late 70s. And during that time, we put an embargo on Iran. Obviously, we haven't done business with Iran now for the better part of 4 decades. And so ultimately, pistachios here in the States started to be grown and come out of California. So now about 99% of our pistachios come from California.
Okay, good to know. So we're eating pistachios. They are made in the USA. That's what you're saying?
The ones in the USA that we typically buy in the USA, made in the USA, unless otherwise noted. The pistachios are big in the Middle East, but for the most part, it looks like out of that Iran hostage crisis, we built our own industry here.
Okay, that leads us to our first story, actually. Here are the headlines, some warning signs for the U.S. economy when it comes to inflation and jobs. Speaking of inflation, another restaurant chain adding a surcharge to dishes made with egg as egg prices continue to climb. And another close call for our nation's planes. Some video shows a Southwest plane and a private jet nearly colliding at Chicago's Midway Airport.
Yeah, quick thinking there by the pilot will give you some context to try to bring your anxiety levels down.
In health news, measles making a comeback. What's behind it? Also making a comeback, Andrew Cuomo, said to be nearing a run for mayor of New York City. Moshe, you like what I did there?
A nice transition there, Jill. It appears New Yorkers, your choices, at least in the Democratic primary this June, Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo. We'll run through the latest.
We've talked a lot about how to keep kids safe online. Now more states want the app stores, aka Google and Apple, to verify a user's age. Not surprisingly, Google and Apple say, not it. Ancient beaches found on Mars reveal that the red planet once had oceans.
Oceans with sandy beaches, but don't book your spring break trip to Mars anytime soon.
Yeah, we're talking billions of years ago.
It's been a while since they had those all-inclusive resorts there on Mars.
Nike, always looking for the next Michael Jordan, now betting big on Kim Kardashian.
I want to be like Kim. Do you remember the ad from the 90s?
Of course.
Yeah.
And I'll take a low-fat, tall Frappuccino with coconut flakes and almond milk. What? Starbucks trying to streamline its menu to get faster service. Which items are on the chopping block? And Moshe has on this day in history.
Speaking of Nike, we'll tell you the story of the waffle iron that was destroyed in the process of making some of their iconic shoes.
All right, a warning when it comes to the economy. Americans are bracing for prices to keep going up and are likely to spend less in the coming months. A survey from the Conference Board showed that consumer confidence fell in February, with expectations that prices for everyday items will continue to climb. The index measures Americans' feelings about current economic conditions and their outlook for the next 6 months. This is all really important, given that consumer spending accounts for about 2/3 of U.S. economic activity. It all comes as President Trump has added a 10% tariff on imports from China and is threatening additional taxes, including a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico. Those could take effect next week. We reported here he did threaten those tariffs before, but then put them on pause. Now he says they will, in fact, go forward. What that means for prices, the 10% in the case of China and the 25% from Canada or Mexico likely gets passed on to the consumer. So expect prices to climb even more.
Yeah, just a reminder on how tariffs work is they're officially charged to the importer that brings in the various goods. And we bring in a lot of goods from around the world here, including from Canada and Mexico, are 2 of our largest trading partners. Well, those importers aren't going to just eat the tariff. They're going to pass it along in the cost. So whatever you buy, parts, again, So whatever you buy, whether they're industrial parts, whether they're consumer products, you're very likely to see those prices go up next month.
It's also likely to set off a round of counter tariffs from our largest trading partners. And prices are already high, especially when it comes to groceries, specifically eggs. Egg prices jumped more than 15% in January as avian flu continues to impact the nation's chickens. Analysts expect the prices will continue to climb in the coming months. This week, Denny's said that it would be adding a surcharge to menu items containing egg. Waffle House put that into place a couple of weeks ago.
So we're starting to see these various moves here by companies, and it is making an impact here on consumers. That decrease in consumer confidence, actually the most significant one that we've seen in 4 years, going back to 2021. As far as the egg prices here, Denny's now joins, as you mentioned, Waffle House, a number of restaurants nationwide responding to the egg shortage, the increased egg prices by passing along those costs to consumers. Now, this goes to the avian flu outbreak that started back in 2022, and it just seems to be ongoing here. Over the course of the last 3 or so years, the avian flu has killed more than 140 million egg-laying birds, and nearly 20 million of those birds have been culled in just the past 30 days alone. This has less of an impact on the chickens that provide us with meat versus the chickens that provide us with eggs. It's a separate type of chicken. They're less they're less impacted by the avian flu, and also it takes chickens much longer to be raised for eggs than be raised for meat. So it's had less of an impact there, and that's why you don't see chicken prices rising as much as you've seen egg prices rise. And egg prices now set to continue to go up here in the coming months. The price for white eggs rose to $8 a dozen last week. That's an increase of 33 cents, about 5% over the previous week. Inventories continue to fall. We've heard from a number of you that have either had trouble finding the eggs that you want, or continue to see those prices go up. Grocery store chains like Trader Joe's, Walmart have placed limits on the number of eggs you can buy. Back to that report we started with, Jill. It also documented inflation concerns on the part of the consumer here. Consumers worried that the inflation rate is going to continue to go back up after they've brought it down to about 3%. The Federal Reserve wants it at 2%. That allows them to lower interest rates. With inflation higher, they get very reluctant to raise interest rates and make it cheaper for you to get cash out, which would then mean you have more cash to spend, which means prices go up. So you have that relationship there between inflation and interest rates. And with concerns about inflation rates either staying or going up, the Federal Reserve will be very reluctant to lower interest rates.
Americans are also feeling less bullish about the job market. The Conference Board's Expectations Index, which measures the outlook for jobs, fell more than 9% in February to 72.9%. Readings below 80 are considered a warning sign for a possible recession.
So that's the feeling people have about the job market. Jill, certainly playing into that are all the cuts that they're promising and trying to execute right now across the federal government. You have seen the unemployment rate already go up in D.C. and the surrounding areas.
Okay, now to a near plane collision on Tuesday that many of you messaged us about. A Southwest Airlines plane and a private jet nearly collided at Chicago Midway International Airport on Tuesday morning. Southwest Airlines flight 2504 was arriving from Omaha, Nebraska. Southwest Airlines flight 2504 was arriving from Omaha, Nebraska, and it was forced to abort its landing and pull back into the air in order to avoid that small private jet that was on its runway. We posted video of the incident on our Instagram page. You could see the quick thinking of the Southwest pilots who were about to land, and then they again pulled up quickly as they see the private plane about to cross the runway. They made another pass. They landed safely. Nobody was hurt in this close call. Southwest saying that the crew followed safety procedures and the flight landed without incident.
The FAA saying on Tuesday that small business jet went onto the runway without authorization. It's not clear whether they ignored the air traffic control message or they just didn't hear it over the radio. We had pilots messaging us yesterday, Jill, on the Instagram page saying that they find Midway to be very busy. A lot of messages and a lot of planes there in a small area. You could hear air traffic controllers telling the business jet to hold short, not cross the runway, but the jet did not follow instructions. We'll wait to hear what comes of the investigation here. About 2,000 feet separated the two planes before the Southwest pilot adeptly, you see the plane go down towards the runway, start to make its landing, and then quickly move back up to go around as they saw that business jet about to cross their runway there. For context here, since many of you are very anxious about flying and there's been a lot of headlines here, there are about 1,700 runway incursions that happen annually. That is like 4 or 5 a day. I know there's been a lot of headlines lately, especially coming out of that collision over DC, that major incident, which, by the way, was the first major commercial air crash domestically that led to deaths in about 16 years. So now everyone feels like all these stories that keep coming out, like, oh my God, are more of these things happening? Or is just the media covering it more in light of what happened in DC last month? And I would go with the latter because, again, 4 to 5 runway incursions a day, not to make you feel better, but just to put it in context for all of you. And when it comes to these close calls, the New York Times went through data from the FAA and federal safety reports and found that there were 503 air traffic control lapses back in 2023. That was a 65% increase over the previous year. So again, this is not all just happening now. We have seen a number of years now with increased incidents, close calls. Thankfully, that's why they give pilots a certain amount of time for sleep. But one of the things we've been scrutinizing of late, and you've heard us repeat this on this podcast, A, the runways are too busy as the airlines try to fly too many planes, and 2, we have a shortage of air traffic controllers. So hopefully they will be addressing that very soon.
Time for the speed read from NBC News. A measles outbreak in the United States has surged to 124 cases since late January. The CDC estimates that 3 in every 1,000 infected children will die from the disease. There is no cure or specific treatment. Public health officials are expanding vaccination clinics and testing sites to try to contain the outbreak, as well as investigate its origins. Since COVID, measles vaccination rates in the U.S. have dipped to below 93% for kindergarteners nationwide, as a growing number of Americans have started to question all vaccines. Experts warn that outbreaks become significantly harder to contain and spread becomes inevitable when vaccination rates slip below 90%. 2 doses of the measles vaccine are 97% effective against measles. That's according to the CDC. The injection is considered safe. The measles vaccine was first released in 1963.
So, Jill, you mentioned that 90% threshold that experts believe that you got to be above 90% to eliminate or prevent major spreads or outbreaks of measles. In the county that's the epicenter of this outbreak in Texas, they apparently a decade ago had about 7.5% of kindergartners who filed for an exemption from the vaccine. Most recently, it's about 18%. So that vaccination rate is down to 82%. Down in Gaines County in Texas there, which has the highest number of cases and happens to have the lowest vaccination rate. So you see how those two are connected there. By the way, when we say that measles was eliminated in the U.S., we should note that the way they define eliminated is eliminated from domestic spread. That if you look at a chart, and we posted one on the Instagram page, you can see that there's measles cases every year. This year had 25, that year had 55. There have been, it's gone down to a very small number, but ultimately there have been cases. So what do they mean by eliminated? Well, ultimately, no domestic spread. All those cases, for the most part, came from abroad. Somebody landing here with the measles from abroad. But now that you see vaccinations start to drop, for the measles vaccine, the MMR vaccine, you are starting to see more of this domestic spread. There was that major surge there in 2018. And now, again, you're seeing it down there in West Texas. So one of the reasons why the elevation there of RFK Jr. as Health and Human Services Secretary has been concerning to some, including some senators who said, listen, we need you to promise us that, you will keep vaccines on the market. You won't pull them, even though you yourself are a skeptic of them. He has actually said himself that he's skeptical that the measles vaccine is even necessary. He mentioned in an interview last year that, he had measles as a kid. So did his siblings. They never got vaccinated. They turned out fine. And that was a bit of his reaction. So that's something we'll be watching here. Jill, as far as what the rest of us should do right now, the vast majority of us got the measles vaccine. It was a part of the K through 12 requirements. If you're born before 1957, they assume you had it. So they assume you're safe too. But one thing you can do is go to a doctor to get your immunity levels checked. I heard from a number of women who found out out while they were pregnant that they had lost their immunity to measles or mumps and needed a booster shot. So if it's concerning to you, if you're traveling to West Texas, certainly you can go to a doctor and get your immunity levels checked to see if your immunity to measles from a vaccine years ago has waned or not.
From the New York Times, 3 years after resigning the New York governorship in a cloud of scandal, Andrew Cuomo is making final preparations to run for mayor of New York City. He could announce his candidacy as soon as this weekend. Cuomo has framed a potential candidacy as an opportunity to save New York City from 4 years of scandal, unease about public safety, and an emboldened President Trump. Wealthy donors have committed to host fundraisers at Manhattan apartments as soon as next Tuesday. Cuomo has personally started to prod additional Democrats to publicly back him.
Yeah, so he's been delaying getting to the race here, and it has to do more with strategy than really indecision. He wants to be the next mayor of New York City. He's been looking at all the scandals that Eric Adams has been involved in. He's unhappy with how he had to exit as governor, and he still, wants to run something. And by the way, when you run New York City, you happen to run an area with a population that's larger than 38 states. There's 38 governors who manage a smaller population than being mayor of New York City. So what's he been doing here? Well, he's trying to shorten the window between now and the June 24th primary, since effectively in New York, anyone who's running, who's serious, is on the Democratic side. And so by crunching this window and announcing as late as possible between now and June, it gives less time for opponents to build a case against him. It gives less time for the media to scrutinize him. And of course, there's a lot to scrutinize, right? There were those sexual harassment allegations against several state employees that ultimately brought him down as governor. Now, we should note that in subsequent legal fights in the courts, he has come out ahead on those cases. They were dismissed. But then there's the other scandal related to COVID-related nursing home deaths and whether and the policies he engaged in may have led to increased deaths in those early months of COVID and the covering up of some of those numbers. So those are a couple of the things that will likely come up in his battle with Eric Adams, of all people, who has his own federal criminal charges that were just dropped controversially, as we've told you, by the Trump administration. So you got Adams, you got Cuomo. New York politics has never been boring.
I'm looking forward to it, Moshe. I can't vote for mayor in New York City anymore, but things are getting interesting.
Well, you guys have no shortage of interesting races out there on Long Island as well, but
more like no shortage of scandalous politicians.
And look at if some people have already messaged me like, this is our choice in New York City, Adams or Cuomo. I'm like, well, unless you want to run, this is what you got right now.
Look, in the height of COVID, New Yorkers and people around the country really did turn to Andrew Cuomo. He just had a fall from grace because of some scandals, but he was extremely popular when he was governor.
Sure, he was. And then, more stuff came out, right? And so ultimately, also, you could say that his COVID record was tarnished by the various moves that he made regarding nursing homes that may have led to a number of deaths there. So it's something we'll watch.
From the Wall Street Journal, the fight over online child safety is reigniting in state legislatures across the country this year, pitting Meta, which is the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, App Store giants Apple and Google. So the dispute here is basically over who should verify the ages of users. Who should be responsible for that? At least 9 states, including Utah and South Carolina, recently proposed bills that would require the App Store operators, Google and Apple, to check the ages of users and get parental consent before letting minors download apps. More than 60 child safety advocates are now forming a new coalition to push for passage of App Store age verification laws nationwide. But Moshe, the problem is that none of these big tech companies think that the onus to verify user ages should be on them. Apple last year helped kill a bill in Louisiana that would have forced app stores to handle age verification. Meta, along with social media companies Snap and X, last week sent a letter to legislators in South Dakota arguing that App Store verification would be simplest since app stores already collect user information.
Right. So should it be the App Store that you have, the Google Play Store, the Apple Store, or should it be on the individual apps? And that's what you're seeing here play out with the tech lobbyists across the country as various states come up with their own laws because Congress ain't really doing it right now. So you have a Republican state senator in Utah who sponsored the bill in that state who says it's a lot easier to target 2 app stores as in Apple and Google, than it is to target 10,000 developers.
Right, because we think, okay, Instagram and Facebook, and that's just Meta, but there are countless apps, and who knows in the future what social media apps kids are going to be using. 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been talking about TikTok, for example.
Right. So they think it's simplest to just deal with Google and Apple, since they basically control the door to all the apps there through their main app stores. And we've told you about the various efforts by parents who've been pushing here for better security to ensure their kids are safe when navigating online and using various apps. The question, of course, is who handles this, who manages this, and it is a big game of not it. Are continuing to say it shouldn't be on us, it should be on them. It shouldn't be on us, it should be on them. And we will wait to see how all the states decide this. And then, of course, then will come the lawsuits, Jill.
From National Geographic, some new evidence from Mars shows the red planet once had a large ocean with Earth-like sandy beaches. The downside, if you want to call it that, they appear to have existed approximately 4 billion years ago. So the planet no longer has a warm atmosphere that supports life. The median planet temperature is now negative 85 degrees Fahrenheit. In winter, the temperatures drop below negative 200 degrees.
If you thought the polar vortex was bad here on Earth.
But the discovery could be crucial in finding out if Mars's surface did support living organisms.
So what happened 4 billion years ago to these sandy beaches and oceans that potentially had life? Well, there's various theories on it, and that's why they want to get there and continue to go discover, because ultimately there's a belief that the water that existed actually is frozen below the surface, that a lot of it escaped into space. But at the same time, they believe there's these huge frozen deposits underneath Mars that, by the way, fast forward many, many years from now, if we wanted to put human habitats on Mars, that could work if, in fact, there was water below the surface that we could then use for oxygen, for drinking, for fuel. Now, as for what happened, there's a theory that a massive asteroid may have propelled the planet to then lose its atmosphere and magnetic field at the time. Mars had a magnetic field, it had an atmosphere, but they believe, one theory is an asteroid so large it sort of threw the whole planet out of whack. Others say Mars is actually smaller than Earth. It has weaker gravity, and its core was never as hot as Earth, so it was inevitable that it would cool over time and lose its atmosphere and magnetic field. Either way, we may get closer to some answers here as we send more missions there. The U.S. is looking to land humans on Mars in the next 15 years. They're really looking at, they want to put humans back on the moon, but in the next few years here. And then in the late 2030s, early 2040s, so 15 to 20 years from now, they're looking to have humans on Mars, though Elon Musk says he wants to make it happen sooner.
The beaches were red, though, right?
It was 4 billion years ago. So it's not clear if we know exactly what color the beaches were. But, Jill, there's actually a beach in Santorini. There's a black beach, a white beach, and a red beach. So we have some red beaches here on Earth, too, if you ever want to check them out.
I've been there, actually.
The red beach of Santorini.
Yes, I've been to, and the black beach. But when I think of Mars, I just think everything's red. Well,
it's been a desert for a couple billion years now. So, the universe, the solar system has taken its toll on Mars.
It's burnt.
It's burnt to a crisp.
Okay, from Bloomberg, Starbucks is removing some less popular drinks from its U.S. lineup, part of a broader plan to simplify the menu and serve customers faster. The beverages getting the axe starting March 4th include several Frappuccinos, the Royal English Breakfast Latte, and the White Hot Chocolate. The drinks apparently didn't sell much. They were hard to make or were too similar to other items that they served. The changes come as the company is eliminating more than 1,000 corporate jobs to reduce management layers and increase efficiency.
Yes, efficiency is the name of the game this year, whether you're the federal government or Starbucks.
But did employees have to write an email with 5 of their accomplishments from the last week? That's the question.
I made 3 Royal English breakfast lattes and 2 white hot chocolates, and it took up an hour of my day. Jill, we've heard from people across the private sector at their businesses who say that they do have to do something similar. And so that's why there has been some pushback on these government employees being like, guys, is this so difficult to put out this email? Now, of course, there's some other issues related to it, and we've explained that on the podcast the past couple of days. Nonetheless, here, high expectations for the new CEO of Starbucks, Brian Niccol. He came over from Chipotle, where he got very high marks. So he's looking to increase efficiency at Starbucks, improve service, as sales have slumped in recent years. Simplifying the menu is a big priority for him. They've already cut a number of drinks. If some of you are still missing the pineapple passion fruit drink, among other offerings that they cut from the menu in the past few months here, they're going to continue to trim their offerings. They're looking to shrink their menu by about 30% by later this fall. Just trying to simplify things, increase service, because all these drinks, it means that the baristas have to make all these various drinks. Some of them take a long time, and that's delaying things, and then meaning that less people are willing to come back to Starbucks. So we'll watch as they continue to cut down on the menu, and then Jill, I imagine, add to the menu in the future again, because that's sort of how the pendulum swings.
And then there are the secret menus. So if you really miss one of these items, I'm sure you could order it and they'll just make it for you.
Tip your baristas. Tip your baristas.
Finally, from Insider, Nike is extending its brand lineup through a rare partnership with Kim Kardashian's Skims. It is a bet that her star power can have a similar impact as Michael Jordan has on the sportswear giant, but for women. The two companies announced Nike Skims last week. It is the line of training apparel, footwear, and accessories for women. While Nike regularly partners with athletes and celebrities for limited edition sportswear, this seems a step up from that typical collaboration, and it is the first time that Nike has partnered with an existing external company to create a brand.
So this long-term detail, they haven't released all the financial details here, marks the beginning of the women's wear specific brand intended to exist alongside some of the others. It does call to mind Nike's biggest partnership that has had now for 4 decades with Michael Jordan. Back in 1984, they struck a deal for about $500,000 a year. With Jordan, they would introduce the world to Air Jordans the following year. And that itself became its own brand. Jordan made way more money through his endorsement deals, including with Nike, than he ever made as a basketball player. He's worth several $1 billion. And 40 years later, the Jordan brand is still a major driver of revenue for Nike. It brought in about $7 billion in fiscal year 2024, accounting for about 17% of Nike's total sales. And so their hope is that Kardashian can be as big as Jordan for them. She, of course, has 300 million plus Instagram followers. She's known globally. She co-founded Skims as a shapewear brand back in 2019, expanded to loungewear. And so they're hoping this collaboration with Skims will be big for them. All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin in 1815. The former French Emperor Napoleon was in exile for a bit on the island of Elba. Well, on this day in 1815, he escapes, retakes power in Paris, and ushers in the 100 Days. So he was emperor, exiled to Elba. On this day, comes back for his comeback. He eventually loses in the Battle of Waterloo. He's exiled again, though this time they don't want to take any chances. Elba's too close to France. They send him to the island of St. Helena in the southern Atlantic Ocean. That is where Napoleon would live out the rest of his days. For those of you unfamiliar with St. Helena, it is an island. It's one of the most remote places on Earth. It's 1,000 miles plus from South America, 1,000 miles plus from Africa, basically in between those two continents on the Atlantic Ocean. To this day, there's about 4,000 people who live in St. Helena. The reason you go there is to go check out where Napoleon was held about 200 years ago. Jill, I'm told there's a weekly commercial flight to St. Helena, if you ever want to check it out.
I guess I know where I'm going for spring break.
I don't know if the weather is great. History is interesting. And if you're looking for peace and quiet, that's where you'll find it.
My kids will be like, we're going where?
Why would we go to St. Helena? Mom's a Napoleon nerd. All right. On this day in 1919, Woodrow Wilson officially designates the Grand Canyon as a national park. It would quickly become one of America's most popular tourist attractions. Sticking with the Nike theme today, on this day in 1974, Nike received a patent for its waffle trainer running shoes. So one of the co-founders, Bill Bowerman, invented these iconic waffle shoes with a waffle iron over breakfast. literally. So until then, Nike was a very small sneaker company out of Oregon. Bowerman was the coach of the Oregon track team at the University of Oregon. One of his runners was Phil Knight, still runs Nike to this day. They were unsatisfied with the footwear at the time. So at breakfast one morning with his family, Bowerman tinkering with ideas because the University of Oregon had gone to an artificial track and he wanted to design a pair of shoes that didn't have spikes but would still grip the ground. So he's inspired by his wife's waffle iron to make a new pair of shoes that have this sort of waffle look on the bottom. It turns out he would ruin the waffle iron, but the shoe idea would take off. On this day in 1993, the first terror attack on the World Trade Center takes place. That's where a van bomb detonates below the North Tower of the World Trade Center complex. It was a nearly 1,400-pound bomb intended to actually bring the tower down, crash it into the South Tower, and then bring both skyscrapers down. It failed to do that, though the explosion underground did kill 6 people, caused 1,000 injuries. Islamic extremists, some tied to Al-Qaeda, were involved in that bombing. And then just about 8 years later, of course, Al-Qaeda would try again with 9/11. We end here with music history on this day. On this day in 1983, Thriller by Michael Jackson reaches number 1 on the Billboard charts. A lot of fun facts about Thriller. The music video, obviously big, has gotten an incredible amount of plays on YouTube through the years after being on repeat on MTV back in the day. It was actually, at the time, the most expensive music video ever shot in 1983. At a cool $1 million, Jill. I feel like that number is quaint today for a music video.
Oh, $1 million.
They spent
That's your budget.
$1 million on the music video. Also, fun fact, Fred Astaire almost appeared in the music video. Michael Jackson had taught him how to moonwalk. And of course, Fred Astaire, known for his dancing, actually attended a Thriller rehearsal. He was an older age at that time. Also, on the set of the Thriller music video, Jackie Kennedy Onassis, she had actually edited Jackson's autobiography, Moonwalk, and so she was apparently hanging out as they were shooting the music video at all hours of the night and day.
And Moshe, we do want to mention we have tried to figure out why Fred Astaire was cut from the actual video,
he just
and we can't find it.
It didn't fit the look of the Thriller music video, but we'll dig into it further. But just a lot of celebs associated with that video.
The Making of Thriller. I would definitely watch that documentary.
Well, he actually, Jill, what we need to dig up actually is Michael Jackson's documentary about the music video, because he, during the music video, had the foresight to shoot a documentary, which I think was like 45 minutes or so, about the making of. And I wonder if he answers that in his own music video, which I'll have to dig around for.
Okay, I know what you're watching this weekend, Moshe.
Jill, as we talk about mysteries, someone was listening last week as we talked about the On This Day in History about Jimi Hendrix performing for the first time at a synagogue. And we were like, why is that? So a listener, Ariel Calvo Rahal, writes in, she's like, don't know if you guys already got your answer to Jimi Hendrix, but I'm armed with special interest knowledge, and DeHirsch was one of the synagogues I grew up at. That was the name of the synagogue. It was for a dance. So older guys from his high school asked Jimmy if he would play at a dance in the basement. Jimmy went to Garfield High School, which has long historical ties between the Black and Jewish community. It's located in an area of Seattle where Jews and Black people were zoned together for many years. And so notably, apparently he was asked by a bunch of dudes, older dudes in high school, to perform at the synagogue. And that's ultimately how he found his way there. Apparently his high school, Quincy Jones, is also an alum of the same high school.
Okay, so Jimi Hendrix wasn't playing Shabbat services. He was playing for a dance. Makes a lot more sense.
He was playing for a dance. And so thank you, Ariel, for arming us with that extra piece of information, which will bring you next on This Day in History when we bring back this factoid, fresh with new details.
No, that is great intel. Thank you so much, Ariel, for writing in. And thank you guys for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It helps us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
See you guys tomorrow.